have to go back. I can't have you coming in and out.
Mom needs ice. Dr. Atterbury. Hi, how are you?
How are you?
Good, good. I'm Paul. I'm one of the chairs of our fellow committee.
Okay, well, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it was either do this or watch the debate.
We realized that, we booked this before, but we realized that we're overlapping with the debate. So hopefully people are starting to tune in this and then catch the debate highlights after the fact.
Yeah, either that or we'll just start yelling at each other and debate right now. Just turn it into a debate.
Yeah, so hopefully this is more collegial than that, hopefully.
Yes, let's hope so. Good Lord. Yes. Huh. Where
Where
are you now?
I'm
You and
my fellowship at Cedar Sinai.
Peter Sinai. Oh, okay. Well, tell my buddy Dan Berman.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
you met through Atterbury. Yep.
Awesome. I definitely
He's a
will.
good guy.
Yeah,
Yep.
he's awesome. That's quite an imaging group. It's an awesome
Yes,
program.
I back in 2005. I worked with him and a few others to form the Society of Cardiovascular CT.
Wow.
Whole January at the Chicago O'Hare Hilton Hotel, we brought about 200 people together. I had the ACC there and the ACR, SBS, STS, and we convinced them all that we needed a dedicated society to this emerging technology and modality that hadn't yet completely been proven, but
Hmm.
obviously now, almost 20 years later, it certainly has.
Yeah, that was some good forethought.
Yep, I really enjoyed that endeavor. It was kind of blazing a trail, and of course the clinical role has been proven, but the financial side has suffered all the
Hmm.
way through because early on, Medicare said that a coronary CTA is no more intense and involves no more resources than a chest CTA. And that's
Wow.
not true. But once that got tagged, that was the reimbursement from then on. And we've never really been able to overcome that.
Right, it's hard to move from that status quo. I'll have to pick your brain about that experience at some point where I've been thinking about that because I'm doing a critical care fellowship this year. So doing cardiology critical care, which kind of like CT was then, it is sort of a burgeoning field.
Yeah,
It doesn't have its own,
um,
society or things like
sure,
that. So it'd be cool to hear about what that was like.
sure. I saw another face there was just a very fast. I didn't. Let me see if I can get my gallery open.
Hey Tim, it's
Oh, there we
Leanna.
go. Now
How
I
are
can
you?
see. Oh, I thought that was you. Long time no see.
Absolutely, absolutely. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, well, since the last time I saw you, I got diagnosed with AL amyloidosis, went through immunotherapy, got an autologous stem cell transplant, was sick as a dog for about a year, and then rose from the dead.
Fantastic. Glad
Wow,
to
so
hear
glad
it.
to hear. Yeah, so glad to hear you're doing well.
Yes, thank you. I, I said it's good news and bad news. I said the good news is for me, I'm going to live. The bad news is for my wife, I'm going to live. So you could have cashed out the life insurance policy by now.
Are you still in the same house in DC?
No, after I got sick and didn't know exactly what was going to happen, we sold the condo in DC and then went down to Florida. And we've been in Florida ever since, outside Orlando.
Very nice. It's a little bit
It's got away from all the, yeah, more sanity in Florida. It was crazy being in DC.
I remember some of your exciting stories.
Yes, they were exciting indeed.
And some warmer weather too.
Yes, much warmer weather and lower taxes. Oh,
I'm
there's
going to go
Abdullah.
off.
How are you doing?
Good, long time no see.
Yeah, well, actually, I just a little over a year from the last time. And so I had no idea what you went through, because you always look so good, I guess. And so it's great to have you here with the California audience from coast to coast.
Well, it's my pleasure. Great to see you.
Awesome. Nice to meet you, Paul and Allison. Thanks for
Yeah.
having us.
It's so good to kind of meet you almost in person. Thanks for all your work.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Nice to meet you. I'm Tim. I'm Allison. I'm another one of the fellows.
Oh, nice to meet you as well.
I guess I'll
Let's
introduce
see.
myself too. I'm Carly, one of the fellows at Loma Linda.
Nice to
Nice
meet
to
you,
meet you.
Carly. All right. Can you all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think what we'll do is give a few minutes for people to file in, maybe at about at 5 after the hour. We'll plan to jump in and get started. That sounds good.
Sure. You just tell me when you can see my slide.
Yes.
Okay. See, it's 6 o'clock West Coast time.
That's right. Yeah, thank you, by the way, for being with us. I know it's later your time in Florida. So sorry for the late session. Thank you for your time and being with us.
That's all right. I spent Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in Phoenix, which is also on Pacific time for most of the year. So it's I was actually adjusted to that time. Spent 5 days there from last Saturday through Wednesday. Got home late Wednesday night.
There you go. So we're catching you still on West Coast time.
Yeah, that's right. I'm still perking on West Coast time. So we've got San Diego represented, right? We've got LA.
I think we have a good mix. We mentioned Loma Linda, LA, Allison's up in San Francisco, UCSF.
San Francisco, yeah.
And then
Going up and down I-5.
Yep, exactly. And then we the sessions our sessions are recorded and just stored on the California ACC website. So we do have people who watch them if they can't make it to the session, who will watch it afterwards too. But I'm sure we'll be up and down the I-5 also.
Great.
So maybe we'll just we'll get started and just to kick off both for people who are here in person and then for all our audience I'll be watching after the fact. Okay, there we
Here we
go.
go.
For our so this is our California ACC speaker series, and Allison and our goal this year has been to focus on the hidden curriculum, so things that you need to know for your career, but haven't learned as part of cardiology fellowship. It's not part of the typical education that we get clinically and on the wards. This is part of our ACC fellow committee. So just to encourage any fellow interested in joining the committee, that we're going to be soon looking for new members for the coming year. So just a shout out for this awesome committee. But I'll pass over to Abdullah just to introduce our great speaker for tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm Abdul Sarkar. I finished up my cardiology fellowship in Florida, where I had a event for fellows similar to this, where I met Tim. And the audience really liked and enjoyed learning from him. And so I'm glad to kind of connect with him again here. So Dr. Tim Atterbury is the CEO of Cardiovascular Associates of America. He and the Webster Equity Partners founded CVA UCA in December 2021 with the intent to partner with leading entrepreneurial cardiovascular group practices around the US with a common goal of providing high quality care and an excellent patient experience while reducing the overall cost of care. And he will talk more about that. Previously, Dr. Atterbury was the CEO of American College of Cardiology and MedAxiom. Before taking the helm at the ACC, he served as president and CEO of Pulse Valley Medical Center in Kingsport, Tennessee. Prior to his HVMC role, Dr. Atterbury was assistant vice president of cardiovascular services for Wellmont Health System and basically led a lot of medical practices. 38 years of healthcare consulting and senior management experience, including serving as CEO of 3 large cardiovascular group practices. He served as a president of the Cardiology Advocacy Alliance for 2 years. CA is not a for-profit organization providing federal lobbying and advocacy for 7,000 plus cardiologists nationwide. He was instrumental in the initial founding of MedAxiom and the Society of Cardiovascular CT. He has authored and co-authored numerous published articles on hospital mergers, strategic planning, advanced cardiac imaging, emerging healthcare services, and healthcare IT. But what's not in his CV and something that I can account on is that normally when you are trying to meet a CEO, etc., someone who's so well established, it's pretty nerve-wracking, and it's like, will they be able to have a normal conversation, talk, or are they going to be like on a different level and it's like hard to communicate with? I can tell you that honestly, if you meet Tim in person or cross him in the hallway, you will. There's no way you can assume that he has a CV, because he's just so easy to talk to and humble and just so kind. And so without further ado, please.
All right. Well, thank you for the great introduction, and thanks for the invitation. It's good to see Leanna again after a several-year hiatus. So let's just go right into the program. And first, just a reminder, I am going to talk about private equity-backed cardiology platforms. So I do have a bias because I'm the CEO of one of those platforms and a shareholder. So just keep that in mind as I talk about that. I'll try not to let that come through, but if it does, my apologies. So here's what we're going to cover in the presentation, and I'll try to move quickly through it. And Abdullah, please send the slides out so everybody has a copy if they would like to review this later, or if they're not already posted. So here's what we're going to cover. The 4 primary opportunities that any CV fellow, as they graduate, as you think about what you're going to do post-fellowship, I want to review kind of the major ones, or the primary ones, and give you then some explanation of those. I do want to give you a quick, maybe 3 or 4 minute tutorial on private equity. You probably have heard a lot about the emerging role of private equity. Maybe you've heard some good things, and maybe you've heard a lot of bad things, but let me walk you through that. Then as you look at these 4 primary opportunities, and of course, we're going to be talking to a lot of specific hospitals or groups or whomever, I want to give you some factors to consider and how you might be able to compare and contrast, and then some pros and cons among them. So here are the 4. You think about 30,000 cardiologists, probably 85% plus, maybe even close to 90% of those 30,000 practicing clinical cardiologists in the US, roughly, they work for one of these 4 types of organizations, either a hospital health system, because most hospitals now are part of big health systems, including academic medical centers, or they work for a single specialty cardiovascular group, what I sometimes refer to as entrepreneurial cardiology. Those are groups that are not owned by a health system or not connected to any private equity-backed platform. Then there are non-academic multi-specialty groups, like maybe Geisinger or some other large, maybe you've heard of the Marshfield Clinic, some other groups that are multi-specialty groups that have a CV department, cardiovascular department. And then last but maybe not least, it's growing quickly, are single specialty cardiovascular groups that are part of a national private equity-backed platform, which sometimes those platforms are referred to as MSOs, or management services organizations. So let's just do a quick tutorial, though, a little detour on what is private equity. So think of private equity as when institutions and individuals pool dollars into what's called a closed-end investment vehicle, meaning that once the private equity fund is formed and has all the money that the private equity company is going to then invest from, it doesn't take any more investment. It doesn't take any more capital. So there's a limited window to raise the money. And then once that window has closed and no more funds are raised, and it's out of that fund that the private equity company invests. And you'll look at this lower right-hand corner. You can see here's the private equity company, what's called sometimes the financial sponsor. They have investors that then put money into one of the various funds private equity company forms, and that fund then invests in different portfolio companies. In my case, Webster Equity Partners is financial sponsor, and I received my equity for CVA USA from Fund 5. I found private equity companies are very creative in how they name their funds. They're Fund 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Webster Equity Partners, the money that I received for CVA USA was out of Fund 5, and Fund 5 developed, think of me as one of the portfolio companies. So what's a little different about private equity is private equity does not invest in public companies. It invests in private companies. And private equity does not invest in startups. Typically, they invest in companies that exist or enterprises that exist, have been around for 10, 15, 20, 50 years. But there's an opportunity by that investment for private equity to do something that would make that organization or organizations like that organization, private equity invest those dollars, make it better, stronger, growing, maybe adding new services, but all of the time needing more capital. So private equity is a source of capital, a source of money. You can get the money from a bank, so it's a source of financing, or you can get the money from, maybe the physicians can put their own money in, or in my case, we bring a lot of money to help private cardiology groups grow and expand. So that's a little bit about private equity. If you think about the last 5 years in healthcare, look at this, 56% of physician group practice acquisitions were from PE sponsored. If you go back before 2019, that number would be much lower for PE and much higher for hospitals. A lot of group practices that are independent, they do not want to be hospital employed. I won't go down the rabbit hole of why that is. We can talk about it maybe if we have time in the Q&A time. But a lot of physicians do not like the idea of working under the thumb, working for a hospital system. But the idea of working with other physician groups to be part of a private equity platform is more appealing. So you can see some specialties, a sizable number of some of these specialties, they go back, some of these specialties are already part of private equity. And of course, if you look at ED physicians and hospitalists, big percentage of hospitalists and ED physicians are connected to private equity. For cardiology, it's still rather small. And why that's rather small is because 75 to 80% of cardiologists in the last 15 years, those that were independent, most of them have merged with or been bought by a hospital. So they're hospital employed. So when we say 3 to 4% of cardiologists are now part of a private equity backed platform, remember that's 3 to 4 absolute percent of only around 25% to 20% of the cardiologists that are independent. So actually of the cardiologists that are independent, private equity is already at around maybe around 16 to 20% of that number and growing quickly. And then there's some regionality around private equity. I won't go down to go cover that in more detail. You can review that later. So for us, here's who we are. I had our first group join in December of 21. We started the company in the summer of 21, but we got our first group in December of 21. Our sponsor is Webster Equity Partners. You can look them up. They're based in the Boston area. We have our own little mission statement about what we are doing. And our basic thesis is that entrepreneurial cardiologists hold the key to creating a more effective and efficient cardiovascular care delivery system. Not hospitals, not insurance companies, not the government. So we are keen on protecting entrepreneurial cardiologists. We think entrepreneurial cardiologists are the secret sauce to creating a more effective and efficient cardiovascular care system. And long term, we believe that cardiologists are either going to be partners or they will be cost centers to the organizations that are taking the risk. So I don't want to think of cardiologists as being cost centers. I want to work with cardiologists that I call the fighting army. They're out there trying to provide high quality care in the most efficient way possible, and doing that in a way that rewards them for not only their production, but also for the efficiency that they create within the system. So that's our thesis. And just a quick snapshot of us. We have 25 large groups. We've tucked in smaller groups into those large groups, and currently we're around 430 cardiologists, mostly cardiologists. We do have a few vascular surgeons and one interventional radiologist, and total patients, active patients right now, a little over 1 million. There was an article that came out relatively recently, June 14th, so not that many days ago, 13 days ago. Get a chance to read. It's a short article in JAMA Health Forum online, and I took a couple of snapshots from this article. First is looking at the growth in private equity acquisitions in cardiology during this same time period that we've been talking about, 2019 to 23, because 24 is not over. And as of the end of 23, based on the author's best information, it's about 50 cardiology groups that changed from purely independent to becoming part of a private equity-backed platform. It's probably a little bit more than that because not all of these are available to be publicly reported. So I think it's probably closer to 60, even 2023 are inside of a private equity-backed platform. And here are the various names of those my company, Cardiovascular Associates of America, and some of my competitors. But what you'll also see is that if you look around the country, top 2 or 3 companies, CVA USA, Cardiovascular Logistics, US Heart and Vascular, we hold a lot of the marketplace. So the orange dots, CVA USA. So we have 8 states, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Illinois, Iowa, and Arizona. And we are going to keep focusing on those 8 states. And if you look generally where groups that have become part of private equity, it's mostly down in the area where I'm taking my cursor. It's this southern part of the U.S., Southwest, not into California. We can talk about some of those reasons. A few here and a few here, but not in any in these regions. And I just want to pause there for a minute to tell you why it's probably not happening where I've got my pointer, if you can see that. These states, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Alabama, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, these states up until relatively recently had strict certificate of need laws that made it very difficult for cardiologists to establish outpatient cath labs. And if you've been following the news the last several years, when I was at the ACC, we convinced Medicare to change the rule to allow PCIs to be done outside of a hospital in an outpatient cath lab setting. So those states that don't have certificate of need laws, like Florida, Texas, Arizona, have been very prevalent, and then recently South Carolina, prevalent for PE companies to invest because you can invest and develop some of those outpatient services. So that kind of explains where we are here. Some of the companies, you can look them up. I think this will be a growing area over the next several years. We're going to continue to grow. My competitors will continue to grow. I don't know if it's going to be a wave, but I wouldn't be surprised if this number goes from 1,000 maybe to 2,000 or 3,000 over the next 4 or 5 years. Okay, enough about private equity. Let's talk about quickly the 10 factors, and I've got 2 slides here that I'm going to go through. 10 factors you should consider when you're evaluating a job opportunity or an organization. And I'll just go through these, and again, I'll try to leave time for questions. So hopefully it'll make sense as I'm going through this. I have found especially every cardiology group, independent group, has an orientation, leans towards something. Many groups are what I call the lifestyle groups. They're more about lifestyle, collegiality, quality, maybe moving into academics and research. Other groups are much more focused on how do we optimize income, protect their autonomy and our independence. We don't want anybody telling us what to do. So when you talk to a group or when you're searching, you have to look at yourself. What is it that you want? If you're wanting more around lifestyle and quality, then you need to be looking for organizations that are oriented that way. However, you're wanting to maintain and have a high level of professional independence and autonomy and optimize income, then you need to look for groups that are oriented that way. Speaking of money, you always want to evaluate when you think about the organizations you're talking to. Here are some things just to consider. I won't go through all of these, but there are a lot of financial implications, not just that starting salary, because I know that's always what a lot of people think about is that headline starting salary, but you need to look beyond just what you're going to be paid the first year or two, better understand what the incentive compensation is, some of the other things around buying in and what the partner compensation looks like, and we'll talk about, and of course, also benefits. Then you want to evaluate growth opportunity for yourself. Are you going to be pigeonholed into one office, one place? Are you going to have limits on your ability to develop your volume of cases? Are you going to have limits on your skills and experience? Are you going to have a great opportunity to take a niche area, whatever that niche may be, whether it's structural heart or some sub-focused area in heart failure? Are you going to be able to actually focus on that? Or are you going to be generalized and not have an opportunity to leverage your full training and skill set? Which then brings you into duties. Anytime you're talking to any organization about a job, you always want to have a specific written delineated statement of what the duties are, and that should be inside the employment agreement. The EA is employment agreement, which should also cover your call frequency, the number of hospitals. Are you going to cover outreach? How are new patients and new studies allocated? Your access to cases, all of that should be described in that agreement and be part of your duties, understanding of duties. Then looking at this for at least the groups that are independent, are you going to have an opportunity to have ownership? Obviously, if you work for a hospital or an academic medical center, you're not going to have opportunity for buying into something because they don't allow that. But in a private practice or a private equity backed practice, you want to understand, how am I going to have an opportunity to buy in? Do I have a certain time to partnership? What are the specific eligibility requirements? Is that in writing? Who's going to make the decision? When they're going to make the decision? What's the formula? Because I've had a lot of people over the years say, well, I was invited to become a partner, but I didn't realize it was going to be such a high amount. I decided I can't even afford to buy in. So you need to know that buy-in formula before you even join one of those independent practices. And it's not just the practice entity. There's also real estate, the ambulatory surgery center, that outpatient cath lab, maybe other entities that you want to be clear about ownership and the opportunity to have ownership. If you're joining a group that has a partnership track where you go from being an associate physician or purely an employee to, after some period of time, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're eligible to become a partner, then you need to understand how our partners paid. And there's a lot of different type of partnership compensation plans. Some are 100% productivity. Some are 100% equal split among the partners. Some are blend. And then when it comes to productivity, how is it measured? Is it work RVUs as published? Is it revenue? Is it time value units, some homegrown approach? And then how does that group determine the distribution of technical fee profits? When I say technical fees, remember that is the revenue generated from the imaging equipment like echo, vascular, SPECT, PET CT, MR. There's a professional fee for those. There's a technical fee. And you'll want to know if that group owns technical fee services like those imaging services and even an ASC, how are the profits from those technical fees distributed? You need to look at autonomy, at what level you have individually, and then what level of autonomy the group has. If the group has none, then where are the decisions made? If they're made by the hospital, then you are you're subject to the whims and decisions that the hospital makes. And you need to understand that going in, that it's not just your group that you're joining. If your group is owned by the hospital, it's good to go in eyes wide open to know how does the hospital and who at the hospital makes the decisions, and does the group even have any autonomy to make decisions on its own, or is everything controlled by the hospital? Infrastructure, working environment, you want to just better understand all those factors. What I have found over my many years, I've been in healthcare since '86, and most of that in the cardiology side, a lot of dissatisfaction in the job is inside. Trust me on this one. Money might look good, but if the culture's bad, management's bad, it has bad infrastructure, poor support, poor facilities, poor equipment, low investments in IT and EHR, and et cetera, that may not be a very satisfying place. You may make a good income, but you're making a good income with a very poor working environment. So keep that in mind. Two more things: organizational, personal job security. It's good to know the financial status of the organization, the financial solvency of the entity you're joining, whether it's hospital, for-profit hospital, not-for-profit, a small group, big group, a group that's part of private equity. You need to peer into those organizations and see how strong they are. Have partners been terminated before, not for cause? I always encourage, when you're talking to a group, find out if other physicians, cardiologists have left that group. Try to track them down and learn a lot about the group by the people that either have been voluntarily or involuntarily terminated by that group. And last but certainly not least, before you do anything, please, please, please get a copy of as much information that I've got listed there as possible. Don't let this be a surprise later. You want to be able to know if there's termination for cause, termination not for cause, who has firing authority, etc. Don't be surprised, because the latest statistic is, I think it's over 50% cardiology fellows switch jobs from the first 5 years after fellowship. And a lot of times it's not because they didn't like the town they were going to or the opportunity, because the group had some issue or there was a difference in what they were promised versus what was actually delivered. So pay attention to these legal issues and always get something in writing. All right. I'm going to try to wrap it up here quickly with what I have come up with, a little bit of subjectively, but hopefully you'll see this as mostly objective. If you look at the pros and cons of each of these four major categories that I just went through. So let's start with hospital employment, because chances are very high that most of you on the call and most of you watching later will end up working for a health system or a hospital, whether for-profit or not-for-profit, because, as I mentioned, 75 to 80% of cardiologists today work for a health system or a hospital. So what are the pros? You know, the good news is these organizations tend to have more financial resources, have stability and solvency. Not always, but generally speaking, compared to a private group, these hospitals are larger, health systems are larger, and they have more financial resources, better infrastructure, better ability to negotiate managed care contracts, probably better job security because of their strength. Oftentimes they employ their own PCPs, so you have your built-in referral base. The income ramp is usually faster. What I have found is by year 3, year 4, you can be at whatever the top income level that it is inside that health system. You can probably achieve that. And there's no buy-in. Of course, there's no buyout. So you're never going to be writing checks. Some of these health systems you can qualify for student loan forgiveness or partial forgiveness, so the benefits are usually pretty good, and the compensation is usually pretty good because of reimbursement compared to a private practice. The cons. I'm sure if you talk to some of your colleagues that are working inside of health systems, they're very slow to make decisions, can be frustrating for physicians. Physician culture and hospital culture, I have found, does not blend very well. There's some exceptions to that, but the bureaucracy inside of a health system, the lack of control, the lack of autonomy, very little personal control, sometimes that can be very frustrating. Senior management in the health system tends to turn over about every 4 or 5 years. So whoever is the CEO or top executives today probably won't be that way in 4 or 5 years. So you're always having a different boss, so to speak. And then health systems, there's a lot of merger and acquisitions. So the system you join may, within a year or 2 or 3 or 4, get sold out or become part of a larger system. Single specialty groups that are not hospital owned and not affiliated with private equity, what you would call the traditional entrepreneurial, good old fashioned single specialty cardiology groups, the one that I like, the ones I was the CEO of for 3 different groups. This is what I'm used to seeing, are single specialty hospital independent groups. So the pros, they're physician led. They have a physician first ethos. It's high on physician collegiality. You're an employee of the group directly. You're not an employee of the health system. Decisions can be made rapidly. Some of my favorite stories of working with cardiology groups is you've got a big decision to make. We all get in a room together, and that decision is made, and the next day we're acting on that decision. We're not spending months with committees doing paralysis by analysis. We get decisions made and we move on. Culture's different. There's usually an opportunity to buy in, own part of the practice, the real estate, the cath lab, and then you can generate income not only from professional services, but also from technical fees. The cons, if you'll go out shopping for a job, can everybody still hear me okay, by the way?
It's cutting in and out occasionally.
Oh, sorry about that. I am working from a hotel space, so I'm sorry if the internet connection is not real great. How is that right now? Okay, good. So on the con side, there's usually in the first 2 or 3 years lower income in these private practice groups compared to the hospital. The hospitals can afford to pay more because they usually are reimbursed more, and the private groups cannot compete as well. But as I said, you've got the positives up in the green box that offsets that. The infrastructure usually less sophisticated, less money, fewer resources. If Medicare changes reimbursement for a service, a SPECT MPI study or a professional fee, you feel it immediately. Whereas in the hospital, there's a buffer, a little bit of a cushion, insulation between Medicare reimbursement and how it immediately affects physician. Now, compensation is usually based upon personal productivity. Some people love that. Some people detest that. So the collegiality factor can be strong, but there's also this idea that you eat what you treat. If you treat more patients, you take care of more patients, you will have a higher income. And then, of course, if you do become a partner, there's also some risk associated with that. At that point, that all of your income is coming based upon the profitability of the practice, and you may have to cough up money from time to time to support expansion. And there's no easy way to raise capital other than borrow the money or take it out of your own pocket. Let's talk about private equity backed group. And what I want to emphasize here, when you think about private equity backed groups, the groups are still operating quasi-autonomously, meaning that you are not working directly for the private equity company. So if you join one of our groups, for example, the Heart House outside of Philadelphia in Marlton, New Jersey, the Heart House, that practice entity still exists. Tax ID number entity still exists. It is under the control of the physicians. They make decisions about who they hire, who they fire, etc. So you're working still as an employee of the physician group. So there still is a physician-led, physician-first ethos. Still very entrepreneurial and nimble, just like your traditional single specialty private entrepreneurial cardiology practice. There are added resources, though, for that group that's part of private equity. If they need money to fund expansion or maybe adding more physicians, or opening up a new office, building an ASC, an outpatient cath lab, you've got the dollars coming to that group from the private equity sponsor. Still a strong group culture, since again, these groups are continue to operate, at least in our case, they operate autonomously from each other. They have their own separate governance structure, partnership structure, etc. You can still buy into the real estate, not the practice, because the practice itself technically was sold to the private equity platform. So we buy, in our case, when we buy a group, that group then is owned by CVA USA, even though that group continues to operate because that tax ID number entity we bought the stock, so that company continues to operate, but there's no longer an opportunity for individual physicians to buy in. So all of your equity, instead of being practice level, your equity is in the MSO. In my case, your equity would be in CVA USA, which is good because then you have the opportunity to have ownership in a national company. And if it does well, you will do well as well with your colleagues around the country. And we provide capital, as I said, for expansion. And then that equity, if it builds up over time, you have an opportunity for building up your wealth. The cons are similar to the cons associated with a independent group, with a few other items. Item 4, private equity companies, private equity backed MSO, we get a percentage of the partner compensation pool. That's how the purchase is structured. I won't have time to talk about that. Partners sell off some percentage of their income to the private equity company. And as a result, the young docs may still be subject to that same scrape, even though they did not get cash for selling the practice. The way many groups make that up is through providing those young docs with equity, as I mentioned, that they do have ownership without having to buy in. So there's a grant of equity instead of having to buy in, since you are subject to this scrape. And you'll probably notice in the last 6 months or so, there has been some increased scrutiny of private equity by the federal government. We'll see how that plays out. And then lastly, it's an unproven track record of private equity in the cardiology space. As I mentioned, we got our first group in December of 21. So December 21 to now is only 2.5 years. So there's not a long time horizon for establishing a track record. And then last, multi-specialty groups. These are groups with multiple specialties. So the cardiology department is one specialty. In that department, it's still a physician-owned, physician-led company, usually larger with more resources, usually an opportunity to become a partner, and you have a built-in referral base. The cons, you've got more bureaucracy with the versus a single specialty cardiology group. And cardiology is one of many specialties. Instead of being the only one, as you would in a single specialty, it is now inside of a blend of multiple specialties that are always competing for resources, for money. And then typically on number 4, the cardiologists, like the other specialists, pay essentially a tax. Some of their income and production is shared back legally inside of the multi-specialty group to the primary care docs. And of course, because cardiology is a department and not a standalone entity, there's less autonomy and less personal control. So I went through a lot in minutes and I wasn't able to really make good eye contact. So I'm going to open up the screen here to see what's going on and see if you have any questions. And I see Lori join. Thank you, Lori, for joining.
Thank you so much. Sam.
Absolutely.
So if there's anything I learned about Californians when I came to California, is that they love California. And so we'll see how good of a pitch you've made, because, you know, until we have that specific type of practice come to California, I guess you're offering them to move. So I'm telling you now, it's a hard battle, but I'm sure they'll consider it. I just wanted to start off with the questions, and then, you know, welcome everyone else on the call to please feel free to ask any and all questions. So one thing you mentioned how it's dependent on politics in terms of what's allowed and not allowed and things like that. And obviously everything is a risk. What is your thoughts in terms of that specific thing? And you did mention in the end that the government's looking into it more in terms of securing a job. How easy is it to leave a practice that gets bought out by private equity or joining a practice that is already owned by private equity?
Yeah, so I think on the leaving side, if you're not part of the group of physicians that sold, but let's say you join a group that's already sold, that has already sold to private equity. So the Hart House in Marlton, New Jersey, 30 docs, and you join them. Well, you joined them, you were part of the selling group. I don't know if they have a non-compete that they impose on their employed docs. Most groups do have a small non-compete, so it'd be very easy to leave. You didn't actually receive any cash during a sale. You stay there for a couple of years, you don't like it, and you can move on. And the group would have a non-compete, typically would have a non-compete the same way the group would have had they not sold to private equity. A private equity sponsored group for docs who are coming in after the transaction, those physicians don't have any different non-compete. If there was one, it would be the same one that was there had the group not sold private equity. It's the same deal. So I think from an ease of exit, it's very easy to exit. For the physicians who sold, it's a different story. Physicians who receive money, $500,000 or $1 million, whatever the dollar amount is, there is a seller's restrictive covenant, and those physicians who receive money, they would have to abide by and comply with both a longer time period and a wider geographic radius. And you probably know non-competes are usually figured over time, 1 or 2 years, and some radius of the offices that you worked in, 5 miles, 10 miles, whatever.
Could you also spend a minute on talking about non-competes? Yeah, I think Allison put it in the chat as well, because it's pretty high information has been going around about non-competes being essentially banned. Would that still maybe apply to this situation because of that financial connection, do you think, or would it change?
Yeah, there are the government has asked for comments on a proposal that would significantly change non-competes for certain professions. Cardiologists would meet that definition. However, there are some exceptions that apply to that. One exception is if a physician is part of that seller's group. Another exception is if they receive stock. So, Della, if you join one of our groups and I gave you 500,000 shares of CVA USA stock, I'm going to do that and say, Abdullah, I'm going to give you these 500,000 shares, but I have a catch. I'm going to need you to abide by a non-compete. I can't give you 500,000 shares of CVA USA stock and have you take those shares and go across the street in a year and compete with the group you just joined. So yes, if there's no consideration, a doc joins a group and there's no consideration, there's no dollars, there's no paying off student loans, there's completely no consideration, and that doc joins. In a world of no non-competes, that doc could join and that doc could exit with no restriction. But if there is consideration, the moment you receive dollars, forgiveness, stock, etc., then somebody can attach to that legitimately, even with these new rules, some form of restrictive covenant. This will all be in writing, by the way. So before you sign anything, please get it in writing and have an attorney review it.
That's good to know, because a lot of physician chats and stuff like that, I think we try to simplify things because it's not our wheelhouse. And so it's like, all right, in a year or two, hopefully I don't have to think about, non-competes being an issue. And so, people move to places which they really want to stay in, take the job that they first can get, and they think, they might not have that big of a hurdle later on. But sounds like, there's obviously more in the details that they have to look into. Let's see, does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to unmute for?
One question was just on that map and on that JAMA paper, and you mentioned as well just that there aren't any in California. Just can you is it political reasons, legal reasons, or just penetrance of this model in different parts of the country? Why is that?
Yeah, the state of California has some unique rules around corporate practice of medicine going back many years. That's why you'll hear the word foundation. If you do a little analysis in California, you'll see a lot of physician groups are under foundations. Foundation model is a California thing. No other state has this foundation model. So if you're a private equity company coming into California, it's a very high hurdle to comply with those rules around corporate practice medicine, number one. Number two, the CON rules, even though they're a little wonky in California, if I wanted to come to California and open up an outpatient cath lab to do PCIs, according to the SCI ACC document for patient inclusion exclusion criteria, I would be arrested. It would be against the law. I mean, think about that. You would go to jail if you open up an outpatient cath lab and you attempted to do a PCI on a patient, even though it may be safe and consistent with guidelines. State of California say you can't do that. And California is not alone. Tennessee, the same rule. West Virginia, Kentucky. If you look back at that map, you'll see no private equity companies in Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, because you've got that similar rule. California just has one more added layer to it, which is labor laws, tax laws, everything else are just much more complicated. So you'll see most private equity companies do not go in to California, at least in any size. We won't be going to California with all those rules in place. Even though I love the weather, I'm happy to go there. Just it would be too expensive to do it.
We do have a question in the group. Yeah, so I guess Carly knew what you were talking about. Great job, Carly. Francisco is asking thoughts on a higher salary from a hospital-owned group versus a lower initial salary from private groups, which I know you kind of talked about, but maybe is there like any tips that you can give us when negotiating a contract with the private equity in terms of maybe loan forgiveness or something, or do you have the numbers where it's like, trust me, or maybe if you can show us the numbers, like in the long run or even in the intermediate term, it actually doesn't make that much of a financial difference when you compare it to hospital reimbursement?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, there are some variations, and Lori leads all of our recruiting efforts. And Lori, I wasn't going to invite you because this thing was so late. I didn't want to bother you, but I'm glad you were able to join us. So Adela must have sneaked you in, so I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, I follow, so it gave me an alert. But I think one of the things that I think distinguishes CVA USA is that we do try to support J1 and H1B candidates. We recognize that those candidates are people that worked very hard to get where they are in the US, and we want to support and have the best team for all of our practices. And I think that's one of the things that also distinguishes us is that we're working hard for that group of candidates that many hospitals have a difficult time doing. So we want to find great candidates. We want to support you any way that we can. And so there are some nuances of what we do in recruiting that are different. And I think that's one that we excel in. And we've really made that a focus to just find the best candidates. And some of our locations are not in major cities. They're outliers from that. So that gives us that opportunity through underserved communities. But it's been fantastic, and we've had a lot of success with that in a very short time.
And Adela, on the comparison, yes, with private equity backed, we are very aggressive, as Lori said, about recruiting. We know our partner groups, one of their pain points is they've not been able to recruit as aggressively because the salaries offered by the hospitals are more aggressive. So typically what we will do, without revealing all the secret sauce, is we will offer upfront dollars as either signing bonus, retention bonus. As Lori said, we may do things around investing for the H-1B side, for loan forgiveness, and we will be aggressive on dollars up front as a way to offset what sometimes the hospitals will offer a good salary, but they can't offer as big of a signing bonus. We'll also provide equity. So for all of the docs who join our practices, right out of fellowship, we give the docs an equity grant, which over a period of around 5 years will probably be worth around $800,000 to $1 million. If you join a hospital, you don't get any equity. So you might make $300,000 more at the first 5 years, but you certainly won't end up with $800,000 to $1 million worth of stock that will build then your wealth that way. So there's a trade-off. If you're looking strictly for the best upfront first-year salary, hospitals generally are going to beat private groups. May not always beat private equity-backed private groups because we've got more incentive to try to match those compensation. Where we'll always win is we'll provide more upfront dollars around signing bonus, retention bonus, and equity.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And so Lori actually works with on Tim's team and leads the physician recruitment. So I can share her contact for anyone who'd like to reach out or learn more. And you can obviously use the fact that CVA USA provides all these benefits as your bargaining chip with another company. Be like, well, CVA USA, that I heard they're from their lead that they offer this and this. What can you offer me? So just to make it a fully balanced talk.
You have my full permission. Actually, I encourage you, if you don't work with us, but you can leverage us, because some people are afraid of us, which I cannot believe, because who would be afraid of me and Lori and CVA USA? But if you need to have a stalking horse, you have my full permission to use us as a stalking horse. Happy to help that way.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. And I would just add one other comment. All of our practices are different. So I can't say that we do this on every offer comes with this, all of these pieces. And that's part of the autonomy and the culture and personalities of every practice. And one of the things we do in recruiting is we really encourage candidates to explore different practices, find where you feel is your home. And we're able to do that with our diverse practices from Phoenix to New Jersey to Miami. And we have the same passion for cardiovascular care, but at the same time, we know there are nuances that make you happy, and we're happy to assist in that to help you find the right place for your future.
Yep, and just maybe stating the obvious, I am a huge proponent of physician-led organizations. I am not a clinician. I have a doctoral degree, but it's in healthcare leadership, so I should never touch a patient. I am a huge proponent of physician-led organizations. I've worked with them. ACC, physician-led. The 3 practices that I was the CEO of were physician-led. I think physician leadership is the key to a successful organization, healthcare organization. Any organization that does not value physicians, you should run from that organization as fast as possible. Even if they're offering you a great compensation, it may end up being a very frustrating, unrewarding, dissatisfying situation over a period of time. That shine will wear off quickly after you realize the kind of environment you're working in.
I have a quick question. As many of these private practice are being bought out or put into partnerships with hospital groups, there's actually a couple interviews I went on where they're actively in discussion regarding quote unquote partnerships. And they will emphasize it's a partnership, we're maintaining our autonomy, we're maintaining, all of the sort of things that you're saying are important. Can you give us sort of the hidden curriculum of what is that really going to look like as a new employee thinking they're joining, this physician autonomous practice, when in reality there's now new need and new demands on the practice?
Yeah. So if it's a practice, if I understood the question, Carly, there are at least one practice you've talked to that is talking about a partnership with a hospital, correct?
That's correct. Not just a big academic hospital institution. Yeah, it sounds like a couple of these in California are doing this.
Yep. So sometimes what that means is this term, you'll hear this, professional services agreement, PSA. And a PSA is where an independent group enters into an agreement with the health system, whereby the health system pays the independent group usually it's a per work RVU fee for its services, and the hospital then bills the services and controls PSA. So I would ask, whenever people use terms like partnership, I would ask, can you reveal to me, disclose to me the specific nature of this? Is this a PSA? Or is the group getting bought by the hospital? It's one or the other. It's either the group is independent, but it's in a partnership, which usually would be a PSA, or the group is going to sell to the hospital. And when they sell, the group could still be called San Francisco Heart and Vascular Institute, but San Francisco Heart and Vascular Institute is now owned by the health system. If it's owned by the health system, there's another word for that. In the health system world, the health systems always control what they own. It's just the two go hand in hand. There is no fine point there. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but in my experience, maybe there's some exceptions. That is just the way it works.
So in the professional services agreement, can you discuss the pros and cons of that? Because it seems like that's what I've been hearing, but yes, I will ask.
Yeah, it's not a bad model. We have one of our group inside of CVA USA that has a PSA with the health system. The good thing about a PSA is it's usually short term, 3 to 5 years. So if the marriage isn't working, you've got a built-in divorce. Stop. Unless both parties want to continue it, it stops. And if you get into a PSA as a group and you don't like it, you can move on. Now, here's the problem, though. In my experience, I've been doing this a long time, I can only think of 2 groups that were in PSAs that got out of them. Because here's what happens. It's you've heard the term sticky. Things get sticky. Once you're in a PSA, the hospital slowly figures out a way to move into different parts of the operation such that it almost becomes impossible to get out. You get stuck. Even though you could leave, the hospital took over the employment of the employees. All the employees now are employees of the hospital, and they like the benefits. They like the compensation. If you went back to being completely independent, you would have to set up the benefit plans. You'd have to go do all the contracting with payers. It's cost of changing the cost of moving to a different platform or going back into being independent. Those switching costs are very high. And when they're very high, it's a very low likelihood of changing. So I think when you look at the PSA, you want to know what the term is. Is the hospital employing the staff, or is the group that's still employing the staff? Once the hospital employs the staff, the chances of there being a reversal in that PSA are very, very low.
Thank you very much. We're getting well, it's 7 o'clock here, but I'm gonna definitely let Paul and Allison take the last word since they've been leading this lecture series. I just want to clarify one quick point. Once a private equity takes over a practice, the physicians who were already there sold and they have a contract. Just want to clarify, is it true that if you join this group after they've sold to private equity, you're not going to get stock benefit because you were offering me CVA USA stock? So I just wanted to clarify that point. Is it possible to still benefit from that or not?
So at least I'll speak for CVA USA. I don't know if the other platform companies on that slide do it this way. Whenever a new fellow joins one of the CVA USA groups, we, CVA USA, not the group, we grant that fellow stock
Okay, got it.
in CVA USA because it is a personal value of ours that every physician who works in any CVA USA affiliated group is an owner. And in my experience, I'm 64, I've been around a long time, probably too long for some people, but in my experience, if you're an owner, you have a different mindset about the organization. If you're an employee and you're just getting a paycheck, you now are not as connected. I like everybody to be a fighting army, passionate for the cause, down in the foxhole, happy warriors, wanting to be there. And if they don't own anything, then they are not going to have the same connection to the organization.
Thanks for clarifying. I'll hand it over to
Yep.
Paul and Allison to wrap up.
Thank you so much. Such an awesome talk. And I think a really great kind of look behind the curtain of a lot of the mechanics of these different practice models. It's a great compliment. We recently had a job panel where we heard from people in different practice environments and kind of heard, I think, a bit more of their experience and more of the high level sort of the doctor's perspective. And now to hear more about the actual mechanics of what that's like. And I think some really great details of what to look for when looking for a job and questions to ask. So thank you so much. This was really a really helpful session, I know, to me, and I'm sure to everyone here.
Well, it's my pleasure to do it. I'm happy Padula gave me a call to the opportunity. It's good to see Leanna again, and thanks for all of you for indulging me for an hour to maybe get some tidbits here and there for what you can use in the future.
Thank you again. I'm currently on the job hunt, so this was very helpful and very practical. So thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Good luck. You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much for taking the
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.